Thank you for joining me this week for the Author Stories podcast. As always, I'd like to thank our sponsor, ThirdScribe. ThirdScribe is a blogging platform for authors where authors can meet readers in a full social media experience. Check them out at ThirdScribe.com. Well, thanks for joining me again this week for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. This week, my very special guest is Eric Tozzi, and Eric is a multi-talented, multi-faceted guy, and I've been really looking forward to bringing you this interview. And without further ado, welcome to the show, Eric.
Well, thank you, Hank. I really appreciate you having me tonight, and I've been looking forward to this for a while, so it's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Eric, I begin each interview with asking my guests to just give us a little brief introduction of how you came to be a writer, and what was it that initially inspired you?
In a very creative family. My parents were both performers, singers. My dad was, in fact, a very famous opera star, and a home where creativity was encouraged. I spent a lot of time in music. I mean, I played piano as a kid. I loved music. I had a huge love for music, and then, of course, when I was younger too, I got into movies, and I got into movie making. As a kid, my dad gave me a Super 8mm film camera, and I just went nuts with it. I just went out and shot. My first movie was a horror movie called Terror in the Backyard, and it was straight out. If you ever seen that movie Super 8, the J.J. Abrams movie, with those kids running around with a Super 8 camera, that's me to a T. I mean, that was me with that camera running around and just shooting whatever I could, putting, monster makeup on people and just, doing all kinds of just really fun stuff. And then, as I got older, I started to read more and more. I started reading, Ray Bradbury, and then then when I was in high school, I really got into Stephen King. I just started reading Stephen King. It was like, it just getting absorbed in these books, in these stories. And so to me, it was sort of like looking at filmmaking and writing. It's like they go hand in hand. They're very, very close. And so after high school, I really started to dive into writing. And how it began was I actually started writing short stories. I was a huge fan of Stephen King's book Skeleton Crew. Yes. And it had all of those great short stories in it. So it was very cool, and I was like, man, I'd like to try that. I got some ideas. I'd like to see if I could write. So with a real typewriter, and literally, banging on the typewriter, I just wrote some short stories, and I enjoyed the process. And then the filmmaker in me wanted to keep going, so I actually started to work on learning how to write screenplays and do screenwriting. And my parents sort of had a footprint in the entertainment industry, got me hooked up with a screenwriter, somebody who'd been writing for some of the TV shows, and said, well, here, let's talk about screenwriting and why, how you need to do it and how this works. And so I got a little bit of mentorship at the beginning, and it just kind of went from there.
Gotcha. So at what age did you kind of determine that you were going to pursue filmmaking with maybe a side of writing, or did you always kind of, after that initial experience, did you, I guess the question I'm asking is, did you feel like you were one type of creative person or another, or did you just kind of keep that whole palette open?
I really kept the whole palette open. I just felt like I wanted to try so many different things. I was just energized by it. I was excited. And so I figured, well, I'll just, I'll shoot and I'll edit and I'll write and I'll do some acting and I'll just sort of, go the whole thing and which is great. And, after a while you start to realize that you can't do everything. Like sometimes you really need to sort of get more focused. And so for a while, for me, it was more on the writing because I got really serious about writing a science fiction script, and this is back. I have to say, it's actually back in like the early '90s, and it was a Mars exploration thriller. And from that script, I actually got signed to a literary agent and started shopping it around to the studios and doing that whole thing. And so I did become very, I guess, focused on screenwriting specifically, and for a long time. Like I really, really just sort of felt like that was it. That was the ticket, and that's what I was going to do.
What were the some of the projects that you were working on in the beginning when you were screenwriting? Was it more science fiction? Was it more kind of Stephen King horror fantasy type things?
Oh, it's definitely science fiction. I mean, I just had always had a love for that genre. I mean, as a kid, my earliest memory when I was a wee little kid was seeing Lost in Space and Star Trek,
Me too.
reruns in the '70s, and I
Oh yeah.
just ate it up. I'm like, oh my gosh, here's like, in the case of Lost in Space, here's a family on a spaceship, and they're landing on other planets. I mean, how cool is that? And then Star Trek, they're beaming down to these planets, and they're beaming back up, and they're going at warp speed. I mean, it blew my mind. So all through my childhood, through grade school, junior high, high school, science fiction was it for me. Like that was just the thing. So I primarily wrote science fiction, like my screenplays and stuff. I diverted from that script with a very good friend of mine that was more of a thriller, sort of a poaching thriller that takes place in Africa, and we actually got that script optioned. We got that optioned at one point. Didn't get made into a movie, but nevertheless, that was a good experience as well.
Awesome. I think there's a lot of us that are, in our, well, we won't name ages, but those of us that are old enough to have children, that a lot of our writing is heavily influenced by Gene Roddenberry
Oh,
and a lot of those early Star Trek episodes.
oh.
That's awesome to hear other kids that grew up and watching those reruns. Um, Tell me about your connection with Ray Bradbury.
Yes, well, that came later in life. That was really just a few years ago, but boy, it was a huge, huge dream for me. I mean, because I was reading Bradbury as a kid, and just always aware of his work. I mean, when I read the Martian Chronicles, and that stuck with me. It stuck with me over the years. So I'll back up to, I want to say, about 2010. I think it was about 2010. I had a producer actor, a gentleman by the name of Brett Steinley, good friend of mine. He said, "Hey, I want to do some actor scenes from a Ray Bradbury short story called Kaleidoscope. It's in his book, The Illustrated Man. It's like the second story in that book, and I want to do some scenes. And a mutual friend said I should talk to you about maybe directing that for me and working with me on it." And I was like, well, yeah, absolutely. That sounds great. And so it progressed from just doing actor scenes to doing like the full short film. And so we kind of dove into the deep end and had to swim, because when we realized, we're going to do this, there's a lot of visual effects involved because the story takes place in outer space. And, but we were just so excited about it. And so a mutual friend of ours and a producing mentor of mine, Mark Zickrey, who'd been friends with Ray for a long time, helped kind of Ray. And so we produced the film. Took a long time. We shot it in 2 days on a soundstage, on a set. And then the rest of it was all post-production. It was all visual effects. It was all just that whole process, that whole post-production process. But once it was finished, we connected with Ray in person. In January of 2012, after we had finished the film, we had the chance to go to Ray Bradbury's house in Cheviot Hills and screen the film for him. And if you've seen in the news recently, there was a story about the fact that Ray's house, had been sold and purchased by a developer, and I guess they bulldozed the house, like they tore it down to build a new house or something, and it was really, really heartbreaking. But I'm so thankful that I got a chance to be there before that happened, and to meet Ray, and to screen Kaleidoscope for him in his own home. It's an experience to watch him see his story, his words play out in a film that I had a part in making, and it was he was just such a sweet man. I mean, just walking in the room, just being in the room with him, he had such a gentle spirit about him. He was so encouraging. He loved the film. We watched it together. He really loved it, and it's just one of those experiences that I'll never ever forget.
I can only imagine that had to be the most surreal thing
Yeah.
in the world. Did he give you any feedback on how you interpreted his story?
He really loved it, and I'll tell you, I heard this from several people before we made the film. They said the people that knew Ray told us ahead of time. They said, "Look, if you honor his material, if you shoot the story, if you just stick to the essence of the story, if you don't try to turn it into something it's not, Ray will absolutely love you and he will back you 1,000,000%." So what we decided to do was, in terms of the story Kaleidoscope, which was part of his book, in I believe 1959, we decided that in writing the script that we were not going to modernize the language. We decided that we were going to use the narration and the language that he used in that book from 1949. So we stayed as absolutely true to the material as we possibly could. The only adjustment we made was that in the short story, they're in spacesuits. These astronauts are coming home to Earth from a mission. The ship blows up and they're thrown out into space in these spacesuits, and they have only a few hours to speak to each other through their helmet microphones before they lose contact or suffocate. And in the case of our hero, who's heading back to Earth, who's basically going to re-enter Earth's atmosphere with no protection. So doing wire work and having an actor screen floating around for 17 minutes is really challenging, to say the least. And it was actually a TV producer, Sci-Fi Channel TV producer, said, "Look, you might want to think about turning that vehicle into a small vehicle, into like an escape pod, so you can have your actor inside this little escape pod, and then that way we can see the whole body, we can see the face, the emotions, the acting can happen, they can move around, they can touch buttons, they can do things, but everything else is the same. The contact with the other ships, with the other people is the same." I think it was a really, really amazing adjustment in that part of the story, and Ray loved it. I mean, he was sort of, mouthing along to the dialogue. Again, we stayed true to the words, and he said, "It's beautiful." He said, "It's beautiful, beautiful. I love it." And he said, and believe it or not, he said this at the end of our meeting. He said, "Any of my other material that you want to produce," he said, "you have my permission." He said, "Go forth." He encouraged. It was so encouraging. It was so exciting. And it was only 5 months later, the week before we were going to premiere the film at our first film festival, that he passed away. And it was just heartbreaking.
I, I
But
but you had that opportunity to screen it for him. That's so amazing.
yeah, and I feel like it was a close call. I feel like if we hadn't finished the film when we did, I mean, if it had taken us another 6 or 7 months to finish it, we missed that chance. And so it was huge. It was really, really huge. But what was very exciting was that in spite of this, because he passed away, we had a packed out theater the night that the film played at the festival in Los Angeles, and they actually had to rent out a larger auditorium because so many people wanted to come and see the film because of what happened. So that was an extraordinary experience, and yeah, it's one of those things that I just think fondly, for the rest of my life.
No doubt. Uh, but Kaleidoscope was not the first film that you made. You actually made a few other films before that, didn't you?
Yeah, and mainly short films and some music videos and things like that. I've yet to direct a feature film, and I hope that someday I'm afforded that opportunity. It would be great. But I've had a chance to to direct some short films. I'd also like to mention there was another project that I was involved with as an editor, not as a director, but as an editor. A friend of mine shot a Stephen King short called Paranoid a Chant from his anthology, from Skeleton Crew. And so he asked me to edit the film for him, and I did. And what's so funny is that after he got the film done, he sent a copy to Stephen King, and about 3 weeks later, Stephen King called him at home and said, "Hey, I really like the film. What do you want to do with it?" And it turned into one of the Dollar Babies.
So cool.
And so actually, so anyway, that was very cool. It's played, it's had some great plays. It got a mention in King's official biography. And as a matter of fact, it played this last weekend, and I think it was Long Beach. I got a message from the producer, director, my friend Jay Holben, that said it played this last weekend. And so that was another one of those sort of exciting, things that I got to be a part of.
Have you had any dealings with any other authors, or do you have any maybe friends or colleagues that have done some screen adaptations of short works or feature length works? It seems like you've had a very positive experience with working with adapting other people's work, and I have heard some horror stories about taking
Yeah.
other people's work. It sounds like that yours have been all wonderful and positive. Have you heard of any of those other type horror stories?
I've heard of other things. I even heard of stories about some of Ray's other material that was adapted by other peep studios and things that he was not happy with. You know what I think it boils down to, Hank, is I think that when you're going to adapt someone else's material, I think you have to take real care with that. Like, that's not to be taken lightly. It's not to be taken like, well, I'm just going to take, whoever's work and I'm just going to make it my own. It's like you don't make it your own. And I knew that when it came to, like, there is no way that I am making Kaleidoscope my own. This is not my own. This is Ray's through and through. And everything that I do, I have to be cognizant of the fact that I need to honor the material and I need to honor the author. And so I think when it comes to adapting written material, whether it's short stories or novels, I think it's very, very important to really have that as a filmmaker, as a producer or screenwriter adapting, to always keep that in mind, like how to honor the material and to bring it into another form, and it still maintains its integrity and its richness that it originally had. And so often that just doesn't happen. I mean, how many times do we hear people, they go see a movie and then they say, "Oh, well, you should really read the book because the book is way better." I mean, that seems to
Yeah,
be that's pretty much the norm. And
right.
there are a few exceptions, but I think by and large, it's in my opinion, I think it's a matter of just respect for the material and respect for the author. And I think if you do that, you can really do something wonderful.
Well, and I heard Stephen King say one time he was telling the story of talking with a particular author. I can't remember who. Maybe it was. Oh, I can't remember now. I don't want to do it injustice, but he basically was telling them, when you sell the film rights, that's it. Walk away from it. Don't expect anything, and know that the book is the book and the movie is the movie.
Yeah.
So it sounds like that he has been through that enough times to to come to peace with that.
Yeah,
It's not always
certainly.
going to turn out the way that you want it to.
Certainly, and I think for us, what was kind of exciting too is that we did the last adaptation of Ray Bradbury material before he passed away. So it's kind of like Kaleidoscope was the last adaptation of his material while he was still with us. So that too is a very exciting thing. And again, I just could tell his heart, and he just I think we really blessed him, and that's just an amazing thing.
That is amazing. Uh, and speaking of you know, adapting someone else's work, you are a novelist as well, and I'm sure that when I think about people interpreting my work, it kind of, you know, sends a cold chill. And I could imagine that you would feel the same way, because when you are a novelist, you have invested all of this world building, and there's so much about the book and the story that maybe you know that the other people don't know. Things like, tell us about how you came to write The Scout.
Okay, I actually just cut out for a second there, and
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your
No,
question. Sorry.
I was just
You
going to
said,
say that you being a novelist, also, I'm sure you have a very real appreciation uh, for not wanting other people to misinterpret your work. But
correct.
I was asking you to tell us about The Scout, your first novel that you wrote.
Yeah, well, that came about. Here's the interesting thing. Okay, so here I am, writing screenplays for all these years, and I actually wrote The Scout as a screenplay because that was just my sort of my default setting as a writer. It's like, well, I open up Final Draft and I type in, fade in, and I start writing, and that's
Right.
just how I do it. And this was in 2009, I believe, I started writing this script. And so a year later, I finished this draft, but I'm just completely unsatisfied with it. And a lot of the inspiration in terms of the science, the invasion, sort of the mechanics of the unfolding of this alien invasion, a lot of that inspiration came from my time at JPL. And at the time I was working at JPL, and I was learning all about planetary exploration. How do we land on another planet? And once we get there, what are we looking for? What sorts of experiments do we do? What sorts of data do we want? And how do we get that data back? And so I'm like, there's no way I can put this in a script. I can't put all this information in, because scripts have to be very to the point. They have to be very short. There's a very, very precise formula and a very precise structure to a screenplay that you really, unless you're, I don't know, James Cameron, you really can't break out of that. Like, you have to obey the rules. And so I just got frustrated with it, and I put it aside. And then in 2011, I still had that story on my mind, but something else happened personally in my life. My father passed away, and so I was suddenly thrust into this mode of, like, having to deal with that, having to go and help my mother at the time, because she was late stage Alzheimer's. And so I'm thinking, now I have to find her a place and find her care and take care of my dad's things. And while this was all going on, and this was in Indiana, my folks lived in Bloomington, I spent a lot of time out there in the woods, kind of hiking and pondering life and everything. And that story stuck with me, because in the screenplay, the alien scout, the robotic geologist, actually lands in a forested area. And I thought, wow, this would actually be like the perfect location. And then a couple months later, I realized, you know what, this is what the main character's going through. He's lost his parents, he's here, and now this thing arrives. So in November of that year, of 2011, I decided I'm not writing a script. I'm done with this, because if I write another script, I'm going to be shopping it. I'm going to try to find a buyer who's going to want to, make an expensive movie that's not based on previous material.
Right.
And it just hit me, like, why don't you just write a book instead? It's like the light bulb went on after all these years, and I think back, it's like, man, I could have done that with some of my other stuff, But be that as it may, I decided, like, okay, so I remember very clearly sitting down and just typing chapter 1 in a Word document instead of fade in, and then I just went for it. And that process to get that book written and proofed and all that, and get it to market, it took about 2 years, but I actually found it to be incredibly liberating and exciting, because I just wasn't worried anymore about budgets. I wasn't worried about which studio, which executive's producing this kind of content. I just didn't care. It just didn't matter. It's like, no, I can write whatever I want. If this last half of the book costs 50 million, it's just words. I'm just telling a story. I'm just sort of, building that. And so it was very liberating to do that.
Wow. What is what's the difference in the mechanics of writing for screen and writing for the page? Do you approach the project with a different mindset? Uh, are you observant of being careful to give more detail in a book, or what goes through the writer's mind?
Well, I think you do have to shift gears. There certainly are some differences and some big ones, but I think having spent so many years writing scripts, I started to learn about how not to belabor things. I mean, the book affords you more time to spend more time with a character, with in an emotional beat of a scene, or on some details of. But you don't want to go so far then that readers are getting bored, or you're just sort of talking or thinking out loud. And so I think they're different mechanics, but at the same time I found that fundamentally, structurally, and in terms of thinking, my thinking was, this is a scene. I mean, yeah, it's a chapter and there's a chapter break, but this is a scene. Like if I'm watching this and I'm experiencing this through the words, what makes sense? When should I get into this moment, and when should I get out of it? When should I bring in this character? What's it going to sound like if he says this, or what if he doesn't say anything? What if he doesn't respond to this other character? What if he leaves the room? So I sort of use those mechanics of screenwriting and also filmmaking, thinking as a director when I work with actors. If I was telling my actors in this scene, I'm giving them, different objectives. How is that going to play out, and how can I do it in such a way that that it's not going to become laborious, or people are going to get tired of it or bored and then start checking out.
Yeah. So you wrote a story about a very human situation and couched it as a science fiction novel.
Correct.
Yeah, which I think is what we all do. We all want to tell a story about characters and about the human condition, and we all maybe have different vehicles of getting there. But uh, what has response been to the Scout?
Well, the response has been very, very good. I mean, tremendously so. I think by and large, I mean, you always have, a few reviews that you get on Amazon that are, somebody just didn't like it, and they, wow, this
Oh
was
yeah,
terrible. I didn't like it. And you always get those, and that's okay. I mean, everyone's entitled to their opinion. I'm not begrudging anyone for, not liking it. I
right.
think as an author, you have to give people permission not to like your stuff, which is hard, but you need to do that in order to sort of cope with it when it comes.
Yeah.
But the response has been very, very positive, and extremely so. And I think that honestly, for me, it is a very personal book, because it's not a book about an alien invasion. I mean, it is on the one hand, but what it's really about is it's about change in people's lives. It's
Yeah.
about the changes that we can affect and maybe prevent, and it's about the changes that we can't, and the changes that we have no control over. And that's really what the book is about. This, losing a parent, losing two parents, not being able to stop it, not being able to change it, but on the other hand, being able to actually stop and thwart a terrible, terrible event from taking place globally, and being a part of that, stopping that from happening. So it's a study in change, is what that book really, really is, and it's very personal. I think some people who don't know me will probably maybe take it at more face value, but really it's a very personal book.
That's awesome. I started reading at the end of last week and am about 10 chapters in.
Oh,
and
great.
I will finish the book through that filter, and it's a fantastic read so far, though. I'm really enjoying it. Um,
Well, thank you, Hank. I appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome. And as a kid who grew up loving sci-fi, and as someone who got to work on Ray Bradbury's Kaleidoscope, uh, tell me about working with JPL.
Yeah, that was a really an extraordinary experience, and one of those things that again I just kind of look back and I say, wow, that was that really worked out well. Well, it was, I was editing at the time. This was about 2006, 2007. I was doing some jobs as an editor, and I saw this job posting for a documentary television editor for the Jet Propulsion Lab. And so, being a huge Mars freak and just a big sci-fi fan, I was like, this is interesting. So I actually responded to the ad. I went through the process of basically auditioning for them. They sent me some footage. I cut it together. I sent it back. They liked what they saw, and we just went through the process. It actually took about 6 months before they actually hired me. But it was suddenly I'm one of a few documentary producers that's on the ground for two of the big Mars missions. The first one was the Phoenix Polar Lander, which was in 2007. It landed in 2000. It launched in 2007. It landed in 2008, and then during that whole time, the Curiosity Mars rover, which landed in 2012.
And what was the scope of the project you were doing for them?
Well, I was doing a series of short documentary pieces basically about the phases and the building, the launching, the landing of the rover, the lander. I was basically telling the story also of the people involved, of the engineers, scientists, it was all about engaging the public in getting them excited about what we're doing in space exploration, because so many people, we find out, really they just don't follow it.
Yeah.
Most times they just don't follow it. And so I was brought on, and there was a whole team. Like, our express purpose was we want to engage people. And so for me, as an editor, what I brought to the table was, I'm going to produce content in a modern visual language that people understand. I'm not going to edit this like you would edit a documentary back in the 80s with very slow moving photos across the screen, or very, very, very gradual fades or whatever. I really was like, no, we need to speak in a visual language that people are used to now. You go to the movies and we have movie trailers. You go to Discovery Channel and cut the number of frames, the types of sound design elements they use. And my whole point was, that's what we need to bring into this storytelling. We need to engage in these modern languages of video and film that people understand. And it worked tremendously. In fact, if you go onto YouTube and type in the challenges of getting to Mars, you'll see a whole bunch of videos that I produced. Some of them I shot, some of the B-roll and interviews, but most of it I just produced, cut, finished, put sound design, put music to, and it really did exactly what it was supposed to do, which was very exciting. We had a huge response to a piece we did for the Curiosity Mars rover called the 7 Minutes of Terror. I'd done one a couple years earlier, 7 Minutes of Terror for the Phoenix lander, and then we basically resurrected that concept for the Curiosity rover, and it was a massive success. I mean, CBS Nightly News actually came out and did a piece on it and talked about it, mentioned it. I worked side by side with some extremely talented producers there to pull it off, and it did everything they'd hoped it would do. And just being there and seeing a behind the scenes look at space exploration, a behind the scenes look at how they build spacecraft, the care that goes into it, the time that goes into it, the focus, the teamwork. you start to get to know the engineers and the people, and that you realize that they have lives like everybody else. They go home, they have families, they have hobbies. It was very, very exciting.
I would have completely geeked out.
Yeah,
That sounds
that's
amazing.
right, sir.
I was going to ask you if those films were still available, and I will make sure to link up those YouTube videos in the show
Yes,
notes for this. That's pretty
yeah,
incredible.
they're still there. Just like I said, if you go to YouTube and just type in the challenges of getting to Mars, there's a whole bunch of them. There's uh, probably I think 4 or 5 pieces for Phoenix and another 5 or 6 for Curiosity. And there's all kinds of stuff, and they're not difficult to find. So
Awesome. Well, speaking of Phoenix, that brings me to ask you about the Apocalypse Weird project that you are involved in, with a book that is from when we're recording this. Launch date is about 2 weeks, but what is Phoenix Lights all about, and how did you get involved with this group of weirdos?
those are group of weirdos. Yeah, we're all a little bit weird. Well, I think it really started last last spring. I wrote a short story for an anthology with editor David Gatewood, and that anthology was called Synchronic: 13 Stories of Time Travel. And so I got in the mix with Michael Bunker and Nick Cole and a couple of the other authors in Apocalypse Weird, Jennifer Ellis, and so I delivered a story that the anthology did extremely well. And it was later that year that Michael messaged me on Facebook and asked if I'd be interested in doing a project with he and Nick again. And I'm like, well, of course, you know. So it really, I think it came out of, and I'd like to say I met Michael Bunker at WorldCon back in 2013. I was there because the Ray Bradbury film Kaleidoscope was playing at the film festival, but also I was there to kind of learn from authors, and I was almost finished with The Scout, and I just wanted to talk to people and see who was there. So I met Michael Bunker through Hugh Howey, as it happened. And anyway, so now fast forwarding back to Apocalypse Weird, building that relationship with Michael, having done the Synchronic story for them, is what got me in the door to do Apocalypse Weird.
I have talked to several people that have credited Synchronic as being this kind of touchstone where so many relationships were built and so many, I don't know, new paths were crossed in Synchronic. It's this kind of weird thing that it's rare that you see a single project like that has connected so many people and made so many paths cross. That's really cool.
Oh, indeed. I mean, it's sort of formed like a small little guild of writers here, you know, that we're all sort of pooling together, and it's cool to see, you know, the same people now I'm writing alongside for Apocalypse Weird that I wrote with in Synchronic, and now other things, and it is extremely really cool to see people, you know, that I'm starting to connect with. I'm starting to get to know them. I'm not in person because, you know, many of us live in different states and far apart, but it's been very, very neat to collaborate on this project and start to mediums and just sort of get a sense of like, wow, there's this camaraderie forming. You know, we're all sort of coming together and creating these things, and it's neat to see that happen in this day and age when so many people are just the lone drummer and the hero, and it's like, you know, I'm going to be the superstar, and it's just neat to see a bunch of writers and some really talented writers and some that are with major publishers that are, you know, humble enough to just say, no, I'm going to work with you guys. I'm going to do this. I mean, Nick Cole, of course, being the obvious one, and it's just very exciting. It's just great to be a part of it.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about Phoenix Lights. What's the story about? The name makes me immediately think about the phenomenon that was, what was it, 1997-ish?
March. It was this month. It was March.
Okay.
In fact, it may even be to the day. Today's the 9th.
Today's the 9th.
Okay, so March 10th, I believe it was March 10th, 1997 was when this event happened, where thousands of people saw and reported these lights in the sky over Phoenix. And the interesting thing about it is that it wasn't just Phoenix. If you look at the reports, there were people that saw things north of here earlier in the evening, as if this object or these lights or whatever it really was made a long pass over a large part of the state. So when I read the Apocalypse Weird bio in terms of the world, and of course, having come off the Scout, my mind immediately landed back in alien country. I'm like, well, okay, if I get to pick an apocalypse, it's going to have to be an alien invasion, because I just it's one of those, and that's where the energy is. So, and then of course, there's the Phoenix Lights incident. There was another huge alien story, an infamous one in Arizona, and that is, of course, the Travis Walton abduction.
Yeah.
Ask anyone about that does UFO investigation. Of course, that's like at the top of the list. So Arizona has a lot of these really dynamic stories in that vein. So I'm like, well, of course I have to do that. So and of course having a production background and being a TV, an editor and shooter and things like that, I thought, well, reality TV. I mean, one of my lead characters has got to be a reality TV producer, somebody that does paranormal or UFO investigations. And so I really parlayed off that and brought together with the Phoenix Lights incident, and then using the mechanisms of the Apocalypse Weird world, where there are some very specific events that are supposed to happen across all these books. My story grew out of that. And of course, I think it's safe now to mention, because several of the books have been published and released, that one of the major events is a blindness. That across every story there is this worldwide blindness where everybody for a day can't see a thing. And some amazing things can happen when I was thinking about it, myself. It's like that would be absolutely terrifying to not be able to see for 24 hours. I mean, it would just be just the sheer magnitude of that event and what it would and the ripples from that would be incredible. So along with all the other stories, my story has that. But I'm basically in a nutshell. My story is the V-shaped objects after 15 years, from 1997 till now, or whatever, it's 19 years or 18. I forgive me, I'm a little math shy at the moment. But they've come back. They have returned, and they're no longer just flying overhead looking at us. Now they're coming to do something else. So
awesome. I cannot wait to read it. You shared your new cover art today on Facebook, and my jaw hit. Every one of these covers that Mike Corley does is just, I'm like, wow. When I saw Jennifer Ellis's cover, I was like, well, nothing's going to top that one. That one is just amazing. And then I saw yours, I was like, well, Corley just keeps knocking it out of the park.
He just keeps upping the game. Yeah, I love Jennifer's
does.
With the polar bear head coming out of the volcanic ash,
No, it's just
and
amazing.
he and I had several conversations back and forth, via email about the cover, and he asked me extensively, like, what's in the book, what are the elements, but I think he really got it. And those, so on the cover you see the V-shaped spaceship coming through the edge of a massive dust storm. I'm using this idea that there is this terrifying horizon-to-horizon dust storm that arrives seemingly out of nowhere. And in the middle of that cover, this mountainous giant mothership, comes through, and it all goes downhill from there. And so he beautifully captured that, but he also captured my heroes, Christina Slater. She's a TV producer, and she's out there with her camera, and her older brother, Gage Slater, who is the main character, the main hero in our story, who is now taken up arms to defend, the group. And then, of course, the aliens in the background, and we had several conversations about that, and I said, no, that, they have to be bipedal, and like just very aggressive, like they're racing, like they're lunging forward like predatory cats, and they're just trying to take them down. And so he captured it absolutely brilliant. I love the little camera that she's holding, the HD
Yes.
camera. It's like a perfect Panasonic HVX 200. I mean, the headphones are on her. She's got the bat. I mean, it's just perfect, and I can't thank him enough for that.
Yeah, it's so cool, so cool. So your book is, am I right that it's going to come out the 24th?
That is correct. March
Okay.
the 24th, so 2 weeks from tomorrow.
Okay. So this will come out close to that date.
So yeah,
So
from
March
tomorrow.
24th.
March, yeah.
Yeah, and what's coming next from you? So you've got this Apocalypse Weird book coming out. What is next on the horizon?
Okay, well, next I'm actually working on another anthology for David Gatewood, Honored, and this just happened very recently, that he asked me to contribute a story to this anthology called Tales of Tinfoil. And I just posted that cover on my Facebook page, and so I'm actually working on that story as we speak. I mean, not as we speak right now, but earlier today, that's what I was doing, was working on my story coming up. I've been recently working on some book trailers for people, and I would like to say I'm working on a big one for my Apocalypse Weird book for the Phoenix Lights. So I hope that it's going to be epic. I'm really trying to make it as epic and huge as I possibly can with what time I have left.
Are you going to have the
Before the book comes
V-shaped
out.
craft?
Yeah. So I'm working very hard on that. And then after that, I've got a few other things that I'm just starting to outline and work on. And I'm just, as soon as I'm done with David's anthology, I'll dive into some more things too.
Awesome. Well, Eric, thank you so much for taking time out to come and talk with us. And we're going to plug your Apocalypse Weird book like crazy. Also the Scout, and I'll link up those videos. Whenever you have something else new come out, please drop by the show to tell us about it. And where can people find you on the web and follow your work?
They can find me. I'm on Third Scribe now, so I have a Third Scribe page. I do have a website, erictozzi.com, and I'm actually going to be retooling that site. I'm actually going to be right now. It's focused mostly on the filmmaking, but I'm actually going to steer it more toward the writing, more toward the books.
Awesome.
I might even set it up so that it points to the Third Scribe page. Of course, you can find me on YouTube with all of those videos, like I said, for the Mars Project. And I'm also on IMDb for my film and television credits. If somebody wants to go to IMDb, they can type my name in. And then, of course, Amazon in the Kindle store. If you type in my name, my author page, my Amazon author page will come up. And I believe you can get the links to all of my work there as well. And I'd just like to say, finally, Hank, one last thing. I am so thankful to Michael and Nick and everyone involved that invited me to be a part of this, because really I'm a new kid on the block. This is new for me, writing books and short stories and really publishing them. And I'm just so grateful and so thankful to them for inviting me to just be a part, to just come along for the ride and to learn as I go and just to grow as a writer. And I really, really appreciate that from all those guys.
Absolutely. And there's been so many positive relationships formed through this project alone, and definitely we have much to be thankful for, and
Yes.
and glad to meet people like you and to connect. And thanks again for coming on the show, Eric.
You bet, Hank. Thank you.